back again. This time, we're going to talk about the 4 levels or the 4 stages of learning. Sometimes it's called the 4 levels of learning or the 4 levels of competence, but we're going to talk about the 4 levels of learning. See, it's not like we just go from not knowing to knowing. We actually go through progressive steps. Now, let's go through those together. The first stage is known as unconscious incompetence. Now, what we mean there is this is when you really don't know what you don't know. Some people might call this, the state of ignorance. Not that you haven't tried to learn, it's not stupidity, it's just purely you haven't had the opportunity, you're unaware of the need to learn something. The next step is called conscious incompetence. Here we become aware that there's something that others can do that we can't do. There's something that others know that we don't know. And so we enter the next stage, conscious incompetence. Once we work through a few things there, we begin to learn, we begin to try, we get to the level of conscious competence. We may have to think a whole lot about it. We may have to really focus on what we're doing to be able to accomplish the task, but we are able to consciously, competently achieve the task. And the 4th level of learning, the 4th stage, is unconscious competence. Here is just the point of doing. You don't have to think about it. Some people may call it the state of mastery. So let's look at it another way. Let's look at it as that interface, that intersection, or the point where we move from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. I call that where awareness begins. Similarly, the interface or the intersection or the point where we move from conscious competence to unconscious competence is the point at where mastery begins. So the real question comes, how do I move from that point of awareness to the point of mastery? And it's done a couple of ways, but basically it's done through what's known as spaced repetition. So let me provide you an example of moving through the 4 levels of learning. Okay? Let's see. The example that Emily likes to use quite often is tying your shoe. When you're a youngster, you don't even think about tying shoes. In fact, I know that some of my granddaughter's earlier pairs of shoes didn't even have shoestrings. They just used Velcro. And at that point, she didn't know that she didn't know how to tie shoes. But as we progress, we notice around us, we become aware, we get to the point of awareness where we look around and we notice some children have shoes that are tied. I remember for me, I hate to say it, but I was in kindergarten and I noticed some of my friends at kindergarten, they knew how to tie their shoes, but I didn't. And so you go through a skill-based learning, and for a while, you remember, let's see, is it over or under or what? But eventually you get a process, and at first you're slow, but you can tie your shoes. And that point where you become aware and now you're learning how to do it, slowly at times, is that conscious competence stage. I can do it, but I have to think about doing it. But eventually you get to that point of mastery where, I don't know about you, but I never even think about what I'm doing when I'm tying my shoes. I'm simply reaching down and I tie my shoes. At that point, I've mastered the skill of tying my shoes. Well, these 4 stages of learning occur for all the things that we move through to master. Let me provide you another example. Driving a car. Let's think about driving a car in particular. As we grow up, there's no question we don't even think about needing to drive a car because we're too young. But eventually, we want to start. And for me, my first experience was when I was 14 years old. Uncle Wayne, a great uncle of mine, came with his one-year-old Buick to our home in Tennessee. Now, Mom and Dad's house had what I'm going to call a teardrop circular driveway, meaning as you entered it at a point and you went around the circle, it came back to that point. It was a great place to learn to drive, but I didn't know what I didn't know. The only thing I'd driven at that point was a go-kart. And the way you drove a go-kart is you sat down and you hit the accelerator pedal, boom, full stop, and away you went. And so Uncle Wayne decided that he would teach me how to drive. He didn't tell Dad, and it was way before Dad wanted me to learn, but we got out in his Buick in our teardrop circular driveway, and he put me on the driver's side, sat next to me, said, okay, put the gear in drive. And he showed me how to do it, and I brought the gear stiff, and then I hit it. Fortunately, it wasn't a stick shift, if you will, a manual transmission, but do you know, I stalled out that automatic transmission because I hit it so fast. I didn't know what I didn't know. So you might say, when I hit that accelerator and stalled an automatic transmission, man, was I consciously incompetent. I knew I was supposed to hit the accelerator, but I was totally incompetent in knowing that it had to be done gradually at first. And that afternoon, I slowly got a little bit better. I had to focus, I had to concentrate. I really wasn't competent enough to go on the streets. I got to the point where I could drive around that teardrop circle and then put it in reverse and back up and come back around. And Uncle Wayne, God bless his heart, sat there in the car with me for about an hour and a half to 2 hours as he taught me to drive forward around the teardrop and drive back. At that point, he had moved me from conscious incompetence to what I would say conscious competence. I could drive. It wasn't time for me to go out on the highways or anything, but at that point, I'd gone from not knowing what I didn't know, unconscious incompetence, to conscious incompetence. I quickly learned what I knew and didn't work, to conscious competence. And over time, you get to where driving forward or backing up, you develop and you master the skill. So those are two examples, tying your shoe and learning to drive, of moving through the 4 phases of learning. Now, as I mentioned earlier and showed you on the slide, let's look at that slide again. To move from awareness, the point of awareness, to the point of mastery, you use spaced repetition. So I thought it might be fun for you to have a chance to hear this again from a different perspective. And let's make it a little game too. So if you download the Word document on this, you're going to find in there 3 links to YouTube videos on the same subjects, the 4 levels of learning. Now, what's also going to be in there that you might find is there's going to be some incompetence in a couple of those videos. See if you can find the mistakes. See if you can find where the folks that were teaching about the 4 levels of learning might have missed one along the way. I look forward to hearing your responses. I'll see you on the next video.